My landlord tried to sleep with my brother but accidentally made us millionaires. My brother Gabe moved in with me 3 months after my divorce, sleeping on my couch in the cramped one-bedroom apartment I was renting in downtown Portland. He'd just gotten out of a bad relationship and needed somewhere cheap to crash while he got back on his feet. I told him it was temporary, maybe 2 months max, but we both knew he'd probably stay longer. My landlord Diana owned the whole building, a converted warehouse with 12 units that she'd bought in the 90 seconds for basically nothing. She lived in the penthouse on the top floor and managed everything herself, collecting rent in person on the first of every month. She was 52, divorced twice, and had this way of standing too close when she talked to you that made conversations uncomfortable. The first time Diana met Gabe was on rent day in October. She knocked on my door at 9 a.m. like always, but this time Gabe answered in sweatpants and no shirt because I was already at work. When I got home that evening, he mentioned that the landlord had stayed for almost 30 minutes, asking him personal questions about his workout routine and whether he was seeing anyone. I laughed it off, told him Diana was just friendly. The next week, I came home to find Diana in my apartment. She claimed she'd knocked and the door was unlocked, that she needed to check the water heater. But the water heater was in the basement, not my unit. Gabe was on the couch working on his laptop, and Diana was sitting in my kitchen chair, her body language way too casual for someone who'd supposedly just stopped by on maintenance business. After she left, Gabe admitted this was the third time she'd let herself in when I wasn't home. I told him to keep the door locked. Diana started finding excuses to be around. She'd coincidentally be checking the mailroom when Gabe got home from the gym. She'd knock on the door asking if we needed anything fixed, even though nothing was broken. In November, she knocked at 10 p.m., claiming water was leaking from our unit into the apartment below, which was impossible since we were on the ground floor. Gabe answered, and she was wearing a silk robe with fuzzy slippers, asking if she could come in and check the bathroom. He let her in because what else could he do? And she spent 15 minutes examining pipes that were clearly fine, making comments about how handy Gabe looked and how she could use a strongman's help around the building. When I confronted her the next day about the late-night visit, she acted like I was being unreasonable. Said she was just doing her job as a landlord, and maybe I was jealous of the attention she was giving Gabe. The situation escalated in December. Diana started leaving notes under our door. At first, they were about building maintenance, but then they got personal. One said she'd noticed Gabe seemed lonely and would love to take him to dinner to discuss a possible job opportunity managing some of her other properties. Another mentioned she was remodeling the penthouse and needed a man's opinion on furniture placement. Gabe wanted to move out, but affordable apartments were impossible to find, and he was still saving money from his new job. We decided to just avoid her as much as possible. Then, on a Friday in January, Diana knocked during dinner with an eviction notice in her hand. She said we'd violated the lease by having an unauthorized long-term guest, and we had 30 days to leave. Gabe had never been added to the lease because Diana said it wasn't necessary for temporary visitors. I tried to reason with her, but she just smiled and said if Gabe wanted to discuss it privately, maybe they could work something out. That's when I got angry and told her we'd be contacting a lawyer. She laughed and said good luck, that she owned the building and could do whatever she wanted. I spent the weekend researching tenant rights and Portland housing laws, getting angrier the more I read. On Monday, I took our lease and all of Diana's notes to a tenant advocacy lawyer named Marcus Chen. I explained the whole situation, expecting him to tell me we were screwed. Instead, his eyes got wide when he looked at the lease. He asked when I'd signed it, and I told him 4 years ago. Marcus started pulling up property records on his computer, typing quickly, and then he just sat back in his chair and started laughing. He turned the monitor toward me and showed me something that made my hands shake. But what Marcus discovered about Diana and that building's legal status wasn't just grounds to fight the eviction, and that's when things took a turn I never expected. There's no record of Diana ever owning this building, Marcus says, tapping the screen, where a property database shows ownership details. According to these records, the building belongs to the Portland Historical Society Trust. It's been in their portfolio since 1987. I stare at the screen, trying to process what I'm seeing. That can't be right. She collects our rent every month. She lives in the penthouse. Marcus keeps scrolling through documents, his excitement growing. This gets better. I'm pulling up the trust's asset management records. There's no mention of Diana as an authorized property manager or collection agent. In fact, he pauses, clicking through more files. The trust has a management company that handles all their properties, and your building is listed as non-revenue generating due to historical preservation status. Non-revenue generating? I repeat, my brain struggling to catch up. What does that mean? It means, Marcus says, turning to face me directly, that Diana has been illegally collecting rent on a building she doesn't own for what appears to be about 20 years. The room seems to tilt slightly. How is that even possible? Marcus pulls out my lease agreement, pointing to the letterhead. This document is a forgery. Look at the Portland Historical Society logo here. It's slightly different from their actual logo. She's been posing as a representative of the trust, but there's no legal connection. I think about all the cash I've handed to Diana over the years. 4 years of rent at $1,650 a month, almost $80,000. So what does this mean for us? For the eviction? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus is already dialing a number on his office phone. The eviction is completely invalid, but that's the least of Diana's problems. What we're looking at here is criminal fraud on a massive scale. He puts the call on speaker as it connects. Portland Historical Society, this is Elaine. Elaine, it's Marcus Chen from Tenant Rights Legal Collective. I need to speak with someone about one of your trust properties immediately. I have evidence it's being operated fraudulently. 20 minutes later, we're joined on a conference call by the trust's legal director, who sounds increasingly alarmed as Marcus explains the situation. I sit there, stunned, as they discuss terms like criminal liability and immediate injunction. But immediate injunction, as that may be, when the call ends, Marcus turns to me with a smile that makes me nervous. Here's what happens next. The Historical Society is sending their legal team to inspect the building tomorrow. They're contacting the police to file fraud charges. And as for you and the other tenants, he pauses dramatically, you're entitled to full reimbursement of every penny paid to Diana, plus damages. Reimbursement for all 4 years? At minimum. The statute of limitations for fraud in Oregon is 5 years, but since this was ongoing, we might be able to push for more, and that's before we factor in punitive damages. I think about the 12 units in our building. Some tenants have been there longer than me, some pay more. The numbers start adding up in my head, and I feel dizzy. What about Gabe, the eviction? Marcus waves his hand dismissively. Forget the eviction. It's meaningless. Diana has no legal standing to evict anyone. In fact, by tomorrow afternoon, she'll likely be the one forced to leave the building. I try to imagine Diana's face when she learns that her 20-year scam has been discovered, all because she couldn't keep her predatory attention off my brother. What do I tell Gabe? I ask. Marcus hands me a folder with copies of everything he's found. Tell him to keep the door locked tonight. Tomorrow, things are going to get very interesting for Diana. As I walk out of Marcus's office, my phone buzzes with a text from Gabe. Diana just stopped by again. Said she'd consider the eviction if I have dinner with her tonight. What should I do? I smile as I type my response. Tell her you'll think about it, but don't make any plans to move out, trust me. The day after meeting with Marcus, I sat Gabe down at our kitchen table and explained everything. His face went through about 5 different emotions in 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and then something between vindication and pure glee. So you're telling me Diana doesn't actually own this building at all? He asked, flipping through the photocopies Marcus had given me. Not only that, she's been illegally collecting rent from everyone here for 2 decades. I said, Marcus is connecting us with a specialized real estate fraud attorney named Vanessa Patel. She's apparently the best in Portland for cases like this. Gabe whistled low, all because she couldn't keep her creepy hands off me. Karma's a bitch. I laughed, but the humor faded quickly. We need to be careful, though. Marcus said people who've been running scams this long can get desperate when they're exposed. We met with Vanessa the next morning. Her office was in one of those sleek downtown buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows and a receptionist who looked like she moonlighted as a runway model. Vanessa herself was a compact woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about us within seconds of our arrival. This is quite the situation, she said after reviewing our documents. The Portland Historical Society is already moving forward with their own legal action, but we need to file separately to protect your interests as tenants. She explained how we'd need to gather other residents from the building to strengthen our case. By that afternoon, we had a plan in place. When we got home, I knocked on Mrs. Abernathy's door in apartment 3. She'd lived there for 15 years and always baked cookies for the building at Christmas. I figured she'd be a good place to start. Diana's been... What? She asked, her hand flying to her chest after I explained the situation. Illegally collecting rent, I repeated. The building actually belongs to the Portland Historical Society. Mrs. Abernathy invited us in, and we spent an hour showing her the documents and explaining the legal process. By the time we left, she'd agreed to join our case and promised to speak with the couple in apartment 5. Over the next 2 days, Gabe and I went door to door. 10 of the 12 units ultimately joined our lawsuit, with only Diana's penthouse and 1 vacant apartment not participating. We set up a group chat and scheduled a building-wide meeting with Vanessa for Friday evening. That's when Diana finally realized something was happening. I was coming home from work on Thursday when I saw her in the lobby, cornering Mrs. Abernathy against the mailboxes. Diana's face was flushed red, her voice carrying across the space. Who the hell do you think you're talking to behind my back? She hissed. I've been nothing but accommodating to you people for years. Mrs. Abernathy, all 72 years and 5 foot nothing of her, straightened her spine and said, I believe the Portland Historical Society might disagree with your assessment, Diana. Everson, not excited. Diana's head snapped up when she heard me enter. Her eyes narrowed to slits as she abandoned Mrs. Abernathy and strode toward me. You, she spat. You think you're so clever, don't you? Stirring up trouble because I called you out on your lease violation. It's not a lease violation if you had no legal right to create the lease, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. And it's not stirring up trouble to report fraud. She stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've survived worse than some entitled brat and her unemployed brother. I'm not unemployed, Gabe said, appearing at the building entrance behind me, and you might want to step back from my sister. Diana's gaze flickered between us, calculation replacing rage in her expression. This is all a misunderstanding. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone. We're past that point, I said. The Historical Society knows everything, and we have a meeting with our attorney tomorrow. Something dark flashed across Diana's face. She leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. If you think I'm going down without taking you with me, you're sadly mistaken. I know people who can make your lives very uncomfortable. She brushed past me, deliberately slamming her shoulder into mine hard enough that I stumbled backward. As she reached the stairs, she turned back. I'd be very careful about where you park that piece of shit car of yours. Accidents happen all the time in this neighborhood. After she disappeared upstairs, Mrs. Abernathy rushed over. Are you all right, dear? I've never seen her like that before. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. Gabe put his arm around my shoulders. We should report that threat to Marcus. Marcus advised us to document everything and suggested installing a security camera facing our door. We ordered one immediately for overnight delivery. That night, we could hear Diana pacing in her penthouse above us, furniture being dragged across the floor until nearly 3 a.m. Neither of us slept much. The building meeting the next evening was held in the basement community room. Vanessa walked everyone through the legal process and what to expect. Halfway through her explanation about damages, we heard a crash from upstairs. That's coming from the management office, said Mr. Patel from apartment 8. Several of us rushed upstairs to find the office door ajar, light spilling into the hallway. Inside, Diana was frantically feeding documents into a shredder while simultaneously stuffing others into a large trash bag. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor. She froze when she saw us, a handful of papers clutched to her chest. This is private property. Get out. Actually, it's Historical Society property, Gabe said, pulling out his phone and starting to record. Diana lunged at him, trying to knock the phone away. Stop filming me, you little shit! Mr. Patel stepped between them. The police are already on their way, Diana. One of the tenants called them when we heard the noise. her face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this. All of you." She shoved past us, heading for the stairs with the trash bag. "The security cameras caught everything," Vanessa said calmly from behind us. I hadn't even realized she'd followed us up. "What security cameras?" Diana demanded, stopping in her tracks. "The ones the Historical Society installed yesterday after I informed them you might attempt to destroy evidence," Vanessa replied, pointing to a small black dome in the corner of the ceiling that I hadn't noticed before. "They've been recording continuously for the past 36 hours. Diana's face went from red to white in seconds. She dropped the trash bag, papers spilling across the floor. Without another word, she bolted up the stairs toward her penthouse. "Should we go after her?" I asked. Vanessa shook her head. "Let her go. The police will handle it from here." 2 hours later, we watched from the lobby as Diana was escorted from the building by uniformed officers. She wasn't in handcuffs, but the officer's hand on her elbow made it clear she wasn't leaving voluntarily. As they passed us, Diana locked eyes with me. "This isn't over," she hissed. Not by a long shot, but the slight tremor in her voice told me she knew it was. The next morning, Vanessa called with news. The Historical Society's security team recovered most of the documents Diana tried to destroy, and there's more. They found records going back 15 years. She wasn't just collecting rent illegally, she was running credit card scams through the building's maintenance accounts. I sat on my couch, stunned at how quickly everything was unraveling. What happens next? The court just issued an emergency injunction against Diana. She's legally barred from entering the building or contacting any tenants, and this is just the beginning. As I hung up, Gabe emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist. "Good news?" "The best," I said. "Diana's officially banned from the building." He grinned, all because she couldn't keep it in her pants. "That," I agreed, "and 20 years of fraud." We clinked our coffee mugs together in celebration, not yet knowing that Diana's desperate attempts to save herself were far from over. The morning of our first court hearing, I woke up to find Gabe already dressed and pacing our small living room. He'd barely slept the night before, checking our newly installed security camera feed every hour like he expected Diana to come bursting through our door with an axe. "You need to relax," I told him, pouring coffee into the largest mug I could find. "The emergency injunction means she can't even enter the building without getting arrested." "You didn't see her face when they escorted her out," Gabe said, checking the locks on our windows for the third time that morning. "That wasn't the look of someone who's going to follow court orders." I couldn't argue with that. The pure hatred in Diana's eyes as the police led her away had left me sleeping with a chair propped under my doorknob despite the injunction. Vanessa met us outside the courthouse, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She handed us each a folder containing copies of documents we might need to reference during the hearing. "The Historical Society's legal team will be joining us," she explained as we walked through security. "They've been extremely cooperative since this affects their property interests directly." Inside the courtroom, Diana was already seated at the defendant's table with a thin man in an expensive but ill-fitting suit. She'd traded her usual casual clothes for a conservative gray dress that made her look almost grandmotherly, a far cry from the woman who'd threatened us in our building lobby. When she spotted us, her expression remained neutral, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. The judge entered, a stern-looking woman in her 60s who scanned the room with practiced efficiency before calling the court to order. The proceedings began with the Historical Society's attorney presenting evidence of the building's ownership and explaining how they'd discovered Diana's fraud. "Your Honor, we have documentation proving the defendant has been falsely representing herself as the building's owner for approximately 20 years. He said, sliding exhibits toward the judge. "During this time, she has collected an estimated $3.2 million in illegal rent payments from dozens of tenants." Diana's attorney objected repeatedly, claiming the Historical Society had abandoned the property and that Diana had acted in good faith to maintain it. The judge dismissed each objection with increasing irritation, and when it was Vanessa's turn to speak, she focused on the tenant perspective, explaining how Diana had threatened and intimidated residents who questioned her authority. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Vanessa said, "during discovery, we uncovered something even more disturbing about the defendant's past." Diana shifted in her seat, and her attorney leaned over to whisper something in her ear. "The court should be aware that Miss Chambers has a prior criminal record," Vanessa continued. She served 18 months in California for real estate fraud in 1998, operating under the name Diana Winters. She has 2 additional fraud convictions under yet another name in Arizona from 1995. The courtroom fell silent. I glanced at Gabe, whose eyes had widened in shock. None of us had known about Diana's criminal history. "She's been doing this for decades," I whispered to him. "We just happened to be the ones who caught her." The Historical Society's representative, a dignified older woman named Eleanor Prescott, took the stand next. She explained how the building had been placed in the trust's portfolio as part of a preservation initiative for historically significant industrial architecture in Portland. "We maintain these properties as part of our mission to preserve the city's heritage," she testified. "The building in question was never authorized for residential rental. It was designated for community arts, space, and light commercial use only." Diana's attorney tried to challenge this, but Eleanor produced the original trust documents with the property's intended usage clearly specified. By lunchtime, things were looking decidedly grim for Diana. The judge had already ruled that the emergency injunction would remain in place and was considering expanding it to include all properties Diana might own or manage in the state. During the lunch break, Vanessa pulled us aside in the hallway. "This is going better than expected," she said. "The judge is clearly not buying Diana's story, and the evidence of her past fraud convictions has completely undermined her credibility." "What happens next?" Mrs. Abernathy asked. She and several other tenants from our building had joined us for the hearing. "The judge will likely order a full accounting of all rent collected, which will form the basis for restitution," Vanessa explained. "And given Diana's criminal history, I expect the DA will file additional charges." We returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session, but Diana and her attorney were nowhere to be seen. After 15 minutes, the judge was visibly annoyed. "Does anyone have information on the defendant's whereabouts?" she asked. No one did. The judge ordered a 30-minute recess for the bailiff to attempt to locate Diana, but I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. "She's running," I murmured to Gabe. My phone buzzed with a text from our neighbor, Mr. Patel. Someone broke into your apartment. Police are here now. I showed the message to Vanessa, who immediately informed the judge. The court session was suspended, and we raced back to our building. Yellow police tape blocked our apartment door. 2 officers stood in the hallway talking to Mr. Patel, who looked shaken. I heard glass breaking, he explained when he saw us. When I came to check, I saw someone climbing out your window onto the fire escape. I called 911 immediately. The police let us into our apartment after taking our statements. The place had been ransacked, drawers emptied onto the floor, furniture overturned, even the refrigerator door left open with food scattered across the kitchen. She was looking for something, Gabe said, carefully stepping over the mess. I went straight to my bedroom and checked the loose floorboard where I'd hidden copies of all our legal documents. The board had been pried up, the space beneath empty. She took our copies of the evidence. I told the officer who followed me in, but our attorney and the Historical Society have the originals. The officer nodded, making notes. We'll add breaking and entering, theft, and violation of the court order to the charges. Do you have any idea where she might have gone? We didn't, but as we were talking, another officer called out from the living room. You might want to see this. On our coffee table, somehow untouched amid the chaos, was a handwritten note. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. The police were still processing our apartment when Vanessa called. They found Diana, she said, her voice tight with urgency. She tried to board a flight to Mexico, but they stopped her at the gate. She's being taken into custody now. 3 hours later, we watched from the courthouse steps as Diana was led in handcuffs toward the building. Her carefully constructed grandmotherly appearance had crumbled, her hair was disheveled, mascara smudged under her eyes. When she spotted us, she lunged forward, straining against the officers holding her arms. You think you've won? She shouted, her voice echoing across the plaza. I made that building what it is. 20 years I kept it running while these bureaucrats did nothing. The officers pulled her inside, her threats fading as the heavy doors closed behind them. Gabe put his arm around my shoulders. Guess we won't be getting that security deposit back. I laughed despite everything. Somehow, I think we'll manage. Later that evening, as we cleaned up our apartment with help from Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Patel, Vanessa called again. The DA is filing multiple fraud charges, she reported. With her prior convictions and the violation of the court order, she's looking at significant prison time. And the judge has already ruled that all tenants are entitled to full reimbursement of rent paid, plus punitive damages. How much are we talking about? I asked, sitting down on our half-rated couch. Based on our calculations and the judge's initial ruling on damages, Vanessa paused. Each tenant should receive approximately $175,000, depending on how long you've lived there. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. $175,000 each? At minimum, Vanessa confirmed. The Historical Society is also offering current tenants the option to purchase their units at significantly reduced rates once the building is properly rezoned for residential use. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence until Gabe waved his hand in front of my face. Earth to sis, he said. What did Vanessa say? I told him about the compensation amount, watching his expression shift from disbelief to elation. All because Diana couldn't keep her hands to herself, he said, shaking his head in wonder. And because she's been running a massive fraud operation for decades, I added. That too, he agreed, but mostly because she got creepy with the wrong guy's sister. As we finished putting our apartment back together, I found myself thinking about how differently things might have turned out if Diana had just left us alone. She could have continued her scam for years, maybe even decades more. Instead, her predatory behavior had exposed a 20-year criminal enterprise and was about to make 12 ordinary tenants financially secure in ways we'd never imagined possible. Sometimes karma doesn't just come back around, it brings friends and throws a party. The morning of the final verdict, I wake up to the sound of Gabe making coffee in our tiny kitchen. It's been 3 months since Diana's arrest, and today the judge will announce the official settlement amounts for all 12 tenants. Did you sleep at all? I ask, finding him already dressed in the one suit he owns, the same one he wore to all our previous court appearances. Not really, he admits, sliding a mug toward me. Kept having this dream where the judge suddenly decides Diana was right all along, and we owe her back rent plus interest. I laugh, but it's hollow. We've all had similar nightmares throughout this process. When someone has controlled your housing situation for years, it's hard to believe they won't somehow regain that power. That's not going to happen. I remind him, taking a sip of coffee that's strong enough to dissolve metal. Diana's already been convicted on multiple fraud counts. Today is just about finalizing the numbers. I know, Gabe says, leaning against the counter, but after 20 years of getting away with it, doesn't it seem too easy, like we're missing something? I understand his anxiety. The past 3 months have been anything but easy. After Diana's arrest, we discovered she'd been tampering with the building's electrical system during one of her break-ins, apparently hoping to cause enough damage to force everyone out. The Historical Society had to bring in specialized contractors to fix it, leaving us without power for nearly a week. Mrs. Abernathy knocks on our door at precisely 8:15 a.m., just as she has before every court appearance. She's wearing her best dress and a pearl necklace that belonged to her mother. Ready for our big day? She asks, her eyes bright with anticipation. At 72, she's lived in the building longer than anyone and stands to receive the largest settlement. As ready as we'll ever be, I say, grabbing my purse. Mr. Patel is meeting us downstairs with his car. The courthouse is packed when we arrive. All 12 tenants are present, along with representatives from the Portland Historical Society and a surprising number of reporters. Diana's case has become something of a local sensation, a rare example of tenants winning against a predatory landlord. Diana herself is already seated at the defendant's table, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of the conservative dress from previous hearings. Her preliminary sentencing for the fraud charges happened last week, 7 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 5. Today is purely about financial restitution. Vanessa meets us in the hallway, immaculate as always, in a charcoal suit that probably costs more than my monthly rent. Everyone ready? She asks, her confident smile doing more to calm my nerves than anything else has. What if the judge reduces the settlement amount? I whisper as we take our seats. He won't, Vanessa assures me. If anything, it might increase based on the new evidence we submitted about the electrical tampering. The judge enters and we all rise. He's a stern man in his 60s who has shown remarkably little patience for Diana's excuses throughout the trial. After calling the court to order, he gets straight to business. After reviewing all evidence and testimony in this matter, he begins. The court has determined that the defendant, Diana Chambers, also known as Diana Winters and previously as Diana Blackwell, has defrauded the plaintiffs of substantial sums through her illegal collection of rent on property she did not own. Diana stares straight ahead, her face expressionless. The court orders restitution to be paid to each tenant in the amount of all rent collected, plus punitive damages of 50% of that amount, plus additional compensation for emotional distress and displacement. He begins reading the individual settlement amounts, starting with the newest tenant and working backward by length of residency. When he reaches my name, the number makes my heart stop. To plaintiff Amelia Kendrick, the sum of $175,822. I grab Gabe's hand, squeezing so hard he winces. It's even more than Vanessa estimated. When Mrs. Abernathy's name is called last, her settlement exceeds $300,000. The total restitution across all tenants comes to nearly $2.4 million. The court further orders the liquidation of all assets belonging to the defendant to satisfy these judgments. The judge continues, any shortfall will become a lien against future earnings or inheritance. Diana finally shows emotion, her shoulders slumping as the full weight of the financial penalty hits her. Her attorney whispers something to her, but she shakes him off. Your Honor, Vanessa stands, given that the defendant is now serving a prison sentence and has no legitimate income, how will the court ensure these judgments are satisfied? The judge nods. The Portland Historical Society has agreed to advance the full settlement amount to all plaintiffs immediately. They will then assume the defendant's debt obligation and pursue recovery through their own legal channels. A murmur runs through the courtroom. None of us expected to receive payment so quickly. Eleanor Prescott, from the Historical Society, approaches the bench with additional paperwork. We've also prepared an offer for all current tenants regarding future occupancy of the building, she explains. Once properly rezoned, each tenant will have the option to purchase their unit at 30% below market value, or to enter into a legitimate lease agreement with rent control provisions. When court adjourns, we gather in the hallway, still stunned by the outcome. Diana is led away by court officers, but she pauses as she passes our group. Enjoy my money, she says, her voice flat. It won't fix what's broken in your lives. Gabe steps forward. It wasn't your money to begin with, Diana. That's the whole point. She narrows her eyes at him. All this because you couldn't take a hint. We could have had something good. I doubt that, he replies calmly. But thanks for the settlement. I've always wanted to start my own business. 2 weeks later, we're sitting in a real estate office signing papers on a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood 10 minutes from downtown. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours paid for entirely in cash with money left over for renovations. I still can't believe this is happening, I say as I sign the final document. 3 months ago, we were worried about making rent. And now we're homeowners, Gabe grins, taking the pen for his turn to sign. No more creepy landlords letting themselves in whenever they want. Speaking of which, I say as we walk to the car with our new house keys. Have you thought more about that business idea? Gabe nods enthusiastically. I've already registered the LLC. Ethical property management has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I've got meetings with 2 small building owners next week who want to outsource their management, using your settlement money to start a company that prevents other Dianas from happening, I say. Perfect karma. That's the plan. Affordable housing with transparent practices and actual maintenance. Revolutionary concept, I know. He laughs, but I can see the determination in his eyes. That evening, we host a small celebration at our apartment, the last time we'll all be together in the building where this strange journey began. Mrs. Abernathy brings her famous lemon bars. Mr. Patel brings samosas from his family restaurant, and everyone shares their plans for their unexpected windfall. I'm paying off my medical bills and my daughter's student loans, Mrs. Abernathy announces, and taking a cruise to Alaska. Always wanted to see those glaciers before they're gone. College fund for my kids, says Mr. Patel, and expanding the restaurant to a second location. Others talk about paying off debts, making investments, or simply having financial security for the first time in their lives. When it's Gabe's turn, he stands up, suddenly looking nervous. I'm starting a property management company, he says, but I need clients. So if anyone knows building owners who need ethical management services. My brother owns 3 small apartment buildings in Beaverton. One tenant offers immediately. He's always complaining about his current management company. My cousin has a duplex downtown, says another. I'll connect you. By the end of the night, Gabe has 5 potential clients and a waiting list of tenants who want to live in any building he manages. As everyone leaves, Mrs. Abernathy hugs me tightly. You know, she says, I've lived in this building for 15 years, and this is the first time it's felt like a real community. All thanks to Diana. I laugh. In a way, Mrs. Abernathy agrees. Sometimes the worst people bring out the best in others. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the sunny kitchen of our renovated house, scrolling through photos on Gabe's phone from his latest property acquisition, a small apartment building that he's converting to affordable housing for families transitioning from homelessness. Ethical Property Management is officially managing 32 units across Portland, he announces proudly, and we just got approved for that grant to renovate the old motel on Burnside. Not bad for a guy who was sleeping on my couch less than a year ago, I tease. All because Diana couldn't keep her hands to herself, he says, shaking his head in wonder. Have you seen the latest update on her appeal? Or denied again, I confirm. Vanessa texted me yesterday. Diana's serving the full 7 years. We sit in comfortable silence for a moment, still occasionally amazed by how drastically our lives changed because of one woman's inappropriate behavior and decades of fraud. You know what's ironic? Gabe says finally. Diana actually did end up giving me a job in property management, just not the way she intended. I raise my coffee mug in a toast. To Diana then, the worst landlord who accidentally made us millionaires. And to karma, Gabe adds, clinking his mug against mine. May it always be this poetic.